any recommendation on the best ways to attach support contracts to hardware models? When is it better to buy an extra and put it on the shelf? Uh, yeah, because if we're talking like Cisco, for example, everybody's familiar with SmartNet and SmartNet contracts. That's pricey. Does it just make better sense to buy some extras and put them on the shelf? That's actually one of the arguments in favor of the white box model is they're so cheap, just buy spares and have them self-insure, in other words. Um, Part of this does get into a little bit of legal flakiness where the vendor may say you must have a contract on each and every bit of hardware or you don't have the right to get support or upgraded or whatever it is, except in the case of egregious bugs or some such. So it can be a little fussy, but I know I was getting towards the point of extras on the shelf when I could, particularly for boring things like a simple closet switch that didn't break very often. Just have an extra and not worry too much about support contracts. Another strategy is the have support on one of them so you can make a call and hope they don't get too curious about serial numbers and these kind of things. But
Yeah, and I specifically think that architecture and design is building the network out to go more towards that model, like you mentioned. You got the leaf spine cloth architecture. You're adding in more redundancy across the board instead of relying on four massive clustered switches or in an M-like fashion or whatever. So you're getting to the point where, even if it is a core switch or a spine switch, it doesn't matter if you just rip it out real quick and throw in another one off the shelf because you don't make too much of an impact there. So having those on the shelf switches, I think is a model that is becoming more and more popular.
yeah, and I mean that's a data center description there, but you can even take some of that perspective and apply that into a networking closet. If you're running stackables and a stack fails or a stack member fails, well, you didn't lose the stack if you configured it all right. Just pop the switch out, pop in another one, and you lost some uplinks, of course. You lost some desktop ports, but off you go. Wireless is the same thing. If you've got enough Wi-Fi density to cover your client base, one Wi-Fi goes out, access point goes out, you can replace it later, and probably no one's going to know the difference.
I think it really depends on devices being fungible, easily replaced, easily purchased, easily replaced. That's what you've been describing here. In fact, we were just working with a customer, and our recommendation is for Wi-Fi. There's such a competition on those devices, on APs, that you really don't need to spare them. Sorry, you really want to use spares, not a contract necessarily on them. Because the competition is going to hold the price down on them.
I just wonder, thinking about having extras, what folks think about going to the secondary market. If you're working with a reputable vendor in the secondary space, that's potentially an option for having that spare hardware sitting in your data center.
Well, you got to be careful about the vendor, though. That getting into gray market, secondary market stuff is pretty dodgy from the vendor perspective. They get pretty ugly about that because there's a market for it for sure, but Cisco has come down hard on some of those players for sure. They don't really want you buying out of the secondary market is my impression.
Yeah, I was just going to say to Ethan's comment there that sometimes vendors like Cisco will have refurbished hardware themselves depending on how old the device is. So that's an option as well if you don't want to go gray market.
Yeah. Which isn't to say there's not a case for that, because maybe you don't care about calling Cisco for support. You've got an old beater 6500 that's been running for a long time, and you got some spare blades on the shelf and some power supplies just in case that you bought from, Bob's House of Used Network Hardware, and you don't really care where it came from as long as it keeps that sucker running for as long as you need it to stay running. That's a different problem you're trying to solve there, for sure. Just I've had mixed bag personally with gray market suppliers and run into problems where we bought something we were told was legit and we were going to be able to get coverage, and we call Cisco and are going, isn't that interesting? You showed up with those serial numbers. Last we heard, they fell off of a truck in China. How did you get them? And it ended up being a hard conversation to have. Well, yeah, it was weird stuff. So again, just be cautious there.
or counterfeit gear.
Oh, I haven't run into that one personally, but yeah, I've certainly heard of that issue, Terry.
Yes. And the other factor is software updates. Do you need to have regular software updates on the stuff?